I always considered myself a good father. My days were spent working at a Xerox company, while my wife, Claudia, held down the fort at home. Our pride and joy was our son, Adam, a bright and inquisitive boy who brought endless laughter into our lives. But one experience with our new neighbors would shake our world and make me question the kind of father I truly was. It was a typical summer evening when we decided to host our annual backyard party. Our invitation list included all the neighbors, just like every year. However, this time, a new family had moved into the house directly behind ours. Alan and Emma were their names, and they appeared to be the picture of health and normalcy. They had a son named Dustin, roughly the same age as Adam. The adults quickly settled into conversations, sharing tales of daily office work and neighborhood gossip. Alan and I struck up a casual friendship, bonding over the mundanities of our jobs. Meanwhile, Claudia and Emma indulged in their own lively chatter. But it was Dustin who caught my attention, and not in a pleasant way. There was something peculiar about the way he looked, a strange glint in his eyes that didn't match the cheerful atmosphere of the party. He and Adam seemed to steer clear of each other, which struck me as odd given Adam's friendly nature. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but notice that Adam was becoming increasingly nervous and skittish around Dustin. When Claudia and I asked Adam if he'd had fun playing with Dustin, he responded, "I don't want to play with him, Dustin is bad." His words sent a chill down my spine, and I exchanged an alarmed look with Claudia. We scolded Adam, telling him not to make baseless judgments about other kids, thinking it was just a minor misunderstanding. Days turned into weeks, and Adam's complaints about Dustin escalated. He insisted that Dustin would peer at him from his bedroom window at night. Claudia and I were skeptical. Every time we went to check, Dustin was nowhere to be seen in his window. Then came the night that would forever haunt us. We were jolted awake by Adam's piercing scream, echoing through our house. Claudia and I raced to his room, and what we saw left us paralyzed with terror. There, in the corner of Adam's room, stood Dustin, gripping a toy gun and urging Adam to come with him for bird hunting. It was a surreal and chilling sight. We immediately called Alan and Emma, who arrived in a state of panic. That's when Emma tearfully revealed that Dustin had been grappling with severe mental health issues, which explained his bizarre and disturbing behavior. Alan was profusely apologetic for his son's actions, but the damage had been done. In the days that followed, our neighbors decided to move away, no doubt in part due to the unsettling incident. As they left, I couldn't shake the guilt that consumed me. Why had I not believed my own son? Why had I dismissed his fears as baseless? The question that lingered in my mind was whether I truly deserved the title of a good father. Living in a quiet, dimly lit neighborhood had always suited my needs. As a 23-year-old music producer with dreams of making it big, my house was my sanctuary. It echoed with the beats and melodies of my work, a constant symphony that spilled out into the peaceful surroundings. Our neighborhood wasn't densely populated, so my loud music never drew any complaints. One day, as I headed out for my morning walk, I noticed something strange. An elderly man had taken residence in the house just across the road from mine. He sat on his porch, sipping his coffee and perusing the newspaper. His grumpy expression and the way he peered over the newspaper struck me as peculiar. It was the first time I had seen him, and an awkward feeling washed over me. I decided to ignore the odd sensation and continued my walk, hoping it was just a figment of my imagination. However, when I returned home, the elderly man had vanished from his porch. Instead, he stood across the road, leaning against the gate to my garden, as if trying to peer inside. I approached him, feeling a sense of unease. "Is there something I can do for you, sir?" I asked politely. The old man's gaze moved from my toes to my head, as if he were measuring my height. Without uttering a word, he turned and retreated into his house, a look of disgust etched across his face. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't help but notice that the old man seemed to be constantly watching me. The feeling of unease grew stronger, and I decided to inquire about him within the neighborhood. That's when I met Davis, a 32-year-old man who had helped the elderly man rent the empty house. As Davis shared the old man's story, I felt a pang of sadness. The elderly man had lost his wife just a year ago. She had been brutally killed by an unknown crook who had broken into their home and stabbed her to death with a kitchen knife while the old man was out grocery shopping. Unable to bear the painful memories, the old man had sold their house, and the case had never been fully solved, as the police had failed to apprehend the culprit. My heart went out to the old man, and I decided to offer a small gesture of kindness. I prepared a fruit basket and went over to his house, even though he didn't seem too pleased by my visit. Later that night, as I lay in bed, a sense of guilt washed over me for ever doubting the old man's intentions. But then, things took a sinister turn. In the dead of night, I heard strange noises coming from the basement. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. Fear gripped me as I rushed to lock the basement door. I dialed 911, trembling with fear as I waited for the police to arrive. They arrived swiftly, and what they discovered left me shivering. The old man had infiltrated my home, wielding a kitchen knife. He had entered through the basement window, which opened into the garden. When the police arrived, the old man was desperately trying to escape through the same window, but it was positioned awkwardly and proved to be his undoing. As they arrested him, the old man raged at me, blaming my loud music for his actions. It was a nightmarish ordeal that left me shaken to the core. 3 years have passed since that harrowing incident, but I still can't shake the feeling that the old man may have been the murderer of his own wife. Her fatal wounds had been inflicted by a kitchen knife, just like the one he had brought into my house. You know, looking back at my college days, I had quite the roller coaster of experiences. It all started when I decided to leave my small hometown of Salado in North Texas and head to Miami for further studies and, well, to soak up some of that wild Miami nightlife. Those first few weeks in Miami, I felt like I was on top of the world. I was hitting the clubs, partying like there was no tomorrow, and, yeah, indulging in a bit more than my fair share of hookups. But as the weeks went by, something started to catch up with me, the extra weight from the unhealthy lifestyle and excessive alcohol consumption. I knew I had to make some changes. So, I decided to join a gym that was conveniently located near the apartment I had rented. I was struggling to get back into shape when I met this guy named Jonathan. He offered to spot me during my workouts, which was a godsend at the time. We started talking, got to know each other, and eventually became good friends. Everything seemed normal until one day when things took a strange turn. Jonathan gave me this Hulk figurine and told me to place it by my bed. I thought it was an odd gift, but hey, I didn't think too much of it at the time. We continued hanging out, working out, and just having a good time. But then, out of nowhere, Jonathan started acting weird. He began trying to hold my hand and getting oddly romantic, and I couldn't help but feel seriously awkward about it. One day, while we were in the middle of a workout, Jonathan casually asked me, "What movie were you watching on your phone yesterday?" I was stunned. How in the world did he know that? I asked him how he found out, and he quickly changed the subject. That left me with a nagging feeling that something was off. After we finished our workout, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I decided to search the room, and that's when it hit me, that Hulk figurine he'd given me. I took a closer look at it and noticed a tiny camera lens concealed in the right eye. I was completely shocked and terrified, thinking about all the personal details he might have gathered. I didn't waste any time. I called 911 and spilled the beans about everything. The police swooped in, arrested Jonathan, and started investigating the situation. When they questioned him about why he'd done all of this, Jonathan finally confessed. He said he was gay and had fallen in love with me. But he knew I was straight, and that's why he started stalking me, watching my every move, trying to learn every detail of my life. It was a real punch to the gut to hear that. I mean, here was a guy who could have just been upfront with his feelings. We could have talked about it, tried to stay friends, maybe even work things out in a way that wasn't so creepy and invasive. But instead, he chose to spy on me, violating my privacy and making me feel unsafe in my own space. To this day, I can't help but wonder what might have happened if Jonathan had just been honest from the beginning. We might have had a chance to salvage our friendship. Instead, it turned into a memory I'd rather forget.
I'm Bliss, and I want to share a story from my past that still gives me the chills. It's about a stalker named Brendan, who managed to get way too close for comfort through my Instagram account and phone calls. I used to be a social media addict during my teenage and young adult years. No matter what happened to me, I had this compulsive need to post about it on Instagram. I loved the empathy and support I got from my followers, who I like to call random strangers. You see, my mom was a hardworking single parent, doing her best to put food on the table for me. But her long hours of work left me feeling pretty lonely. I turned to the online world to fill that void. One night, around 2 a.m., my mom and I had a heated argument about my social media addiction. I was angry, so I locked myself in my room and posted a highly emotional rant about parents not understanding their children's struggles. I was hoping for some quick dopamine hits from the comments. A few hours later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I was too sad and angry to wonder how this person got my number. Our conversation began, and the stranger introduced himself as Brendan. He asked why I was so sad about my mom and told me that no one had the right to make me cry. His words made me feel warm and fuzzy, and I poured out my feelings, saying how everyone seemed to pretend they cared, but I felt utterly alone. As the night grew darker, our conversations got even more personal. We connected in a way I hadn't experienced before, and it made me feel less isolated. It was like he understood me better than anyone else. Days turned into weeks, and we continued talking. I no longer felt alone, and strangely, my relationship with my mother started to improve too. It was a period of my life when I finally had some peace of mind. It felt like a small ray of sunshine in my otherwise cloudy world. But then, one night, I started asking Brendan some personal questions. I wanted to know more about him, his age, work, and other personal details. He hesitated, and I got mad, abruptly ending the call. He tried calling me multiple times, but I ignored him. Something didn't sit right with me. He hadn't answered my questions, and it started to feel creepy. He kept calling and texting, and this time, I couldn't ignore it. I reached out to my small circle of friends, but they had no idea about Brendan. That's when the creepiness began to grow on me. I had this sinking feeling that he must have gathered basic information about me from my Instagram account. I decided to confront Brendan. I called him, anger in my voice, and asked, "How did you get my number?" But he had no satisfactory answer. I kept grilling him with questions, but he remained evasive. In the end, I couldn't take it anymore, so I blocked him. However, Brendan didn't give up that easily. He started texting me on Instagram, pleading for forgiveness, but I didn't reply. It's almost been a month, and that's when he showed his true colors. His comments on my photos and messages on Instagram became inappropriate and downright creepy. I was terrified and decided to block him again. But Brendan wasn't done. He created another account and continued his harassment. It was relentless, and I felt trapped. My last resort was to delete my Instagram account entirely and walk away from it. To this day, the thought that this guy had vile intentions regarding me still gives me the creeps. It's a chilling reminder of how someone can invade your life through social media, exploiting your vulnerability. It's a lesson I've learned the hard way, and it's why I've become more cautious and vigilant in my online interactions.
I've always been worried someone would post their bad experience with me. So here's my story. I won't lie. I'm the bad guy in this story. There was a time I had a huge crush on someone I worked with at FedEx, and unfortunately, I was the stalker. Still to this day, I feel so much guilt and depression. Being sheltered as a kid does bad things to people. Long story short, I asked this girl if we could be friends on Facebook. She said yes, and I felt a rush of euphoria being as I really had a crush on her. The problem was as I told her sensitive details about my abusive childhood and teenage years, and it was too early to spill my heart out. I wanted to hang out with her to get to know her more because I really liked her. She told me she was a single mom and stuff and felt bad bringing her kid because she said women with a kid scare off most men. But I didn't feel uncomfortable with her bringing her kid to hang out. The day came we got to hang out and she brought her kid. But her kid didn't make me uncomfortable at all. What made me feel very uncomfortable was I noticed the first time we went to hang out at some restaurant called O'Carly's, she had a baseball bat in her car near the middle of the car, between the driver and passenger seat. I felt a wave of guilt and sadness because I felt she was afraid of me, and I felt like I made a bad decision telling her about my past. Things went well after we hung out, and I wanted to hang out more. But there came a time my conscience kept tormenting me with guilt when I kept thinking about her maybe feeling unsafe. Eventually, I messaged her on Facebook telling her about the things in my past being bullcrap, and I was sorry for lying. She became really upset and eventually stopped replying to me. I felt even worse and kept messaging her, but eventually it was annoying to her and she ended up blocking me. Eventually I was stalkish and wrote a huge apology letter because I felt extremely awful near suicide at the time. This was the time I had finally gotten my license and started driving. I made another Facebook account and started looking at her pictures and scouring Google Maps like a hawk. Eventually I found the street she lived on and went to her house at like 2 in the morning during a bad rainstorm. Originally, I left the envelope on her steps, but I noticed the rain gotten progressively worse. So feeling still depressed and on the verge of suicide and guilty, I left the letter in her mailbox because the rain was much worse. And things just escalated. To be honest, I still feel awful. I truly did make her uncomfortable being as she never mentioned where she lived and I freaked her out with the envelope being there. I still feel awful about it, and sometimes I drink until I can't feel my fingertips. Alcohol makes things worse. Now I'm on antidepressants. Best decision I ever made. My advice to people if you have social media: don't allow your personal photos of anywhere near your house be visible to the public. I deleted my Facebook 2 years ago for political reasons. But now you've seen the perspective of the bad guy. I hope I've saved someone else from someone who was in my bad and confusing situation. It all began during my teenage years when I had a burning desire to achieve financial freedom at a young age. I was exposed to those enticing videos promising quick and easy riches, but I soon realized that those claims were nothing but empty promises. If I wanted to succeed, I needed to acquire knowledge and hustle legitimately. Growing up in a neighborhood where some kids turned to selling drugs and pursuing hip-hop dreams, I knew I didn't have the talent for either. So, I took a different path. I immersed myself in finance and investment books, although I must admit I often resorted to illegally downloading PDFs of these books. That's what you'd expect from the son of a small-time drug dealer. As the years passed, I started investing in stocks, primarily by purchasing inexpensive ones. By the age of 23, my efforts began to bear fruit. But I kept this a secret from my parents, well aware that my mother, struggling with addiction, might deplete my earnings, and my father, who had his stash of weed, would be furious if he knew I had taken money from his pockets while he was asleep. As my financial success started to show, I couldn't resist flaunting my newfound wealth with new shoes, clothes, and a fancy watch. My mother, observant as ever, took notice of this transformation and confronted me about it. Panicking, I told her a lie, claiming that I had resorted to selling crack like my father. Later that night, I had a heated argument with my dad, who vehemently opposed my dangerous decision. The argument escalated, leading me to run out of our apartment and stumble upon someone who would change my life forever, a man named Baron. Baron, slightly older than me, possessed a charisma that drew me in. We quickly became friends, and he began coming over to my apartment frequently. Over time, I trusted him completely. However, a few months into our friendship, Baron began inquiring about my sources of income. Knowing how things worked in our neighborhood, I understood that once someone discovered you had money, it was only a matter of time before they tried to take it. I was reluctant to reveal my financial secret, as it was the result of years of studying and understanding finance and investments. One day, while Baron and I were hanging out, he casually asked me, "Why do you admire this Asian-looking Robert guy so much?" I replied, "Because I aspire to be as wealthy as him." Suddenly, I realized that Baron knew about my aspirations, and a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't fathom how he had learned this information. Alarmed, I rushed home, desperately searching every nook and cranny of my apartment. That's when I found a hidden camera discreetly nestled in a crack in the wall. My heart raced, and a flood of thoughts overwhelmed me. I knew I couldn't react too strongly, as it could put my life in danger. In the following days, I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy in front of Baron and at home, all the while being aware that someone was constantly watching my every move. The fear and paranoia were insufferable, but I had to keep my composure for my own safety. Then, one night, a friend knocked on my door with the devastating news that my father had been shot and killed. It was as if my entire world crumbled before my eyes. I struggled to contain my emotions, and after the funeral, I made the difficult decision to move to an unknown location with my mother. We relocated to the countryside and rented a small house, eventually purchasing it as our permanent residence. I started a small grocery store to make ends meet. But what has haunted me to this day is that Baron never showed his face to me after I discovered the hidden camera. He didn't even attend my father's funeral. The thought has lingered in my mind, a gnawing suspicion that perhaps Baron was somehow involved in my father's tragic death. This experience has left me with a profound sense of unease and mistrust.